So let's start by talking with the audience, introducing the audience to the man of the hour in China, Xi Jinping. He's about to have a big month ahead of him. He's been planning this for quite a long time. Talk to us about him. What is he driven by? What does he want? And then I want to ask some specifics about, from your book, very well put about the view of the U.S. And his China dream. But why don't you start with, who is he? What's he driven by?
Xi Jinping. I've probably had, 8 or 9 one-on-one conversations with him over the years. And since I've left office, a number of small group conversations. So it's not a foolproof mechanism to understand the personality of a leader of a major country, but it gives you some insights, I think. I think the first thing that strikes you between the eyeballs with Xi Jinping is his enormous level of self-confidence. Like there is something I never sensed, for example, in Hu Jintao. Reflected in the fact that in every conversation I've ever had with Xi Jinping, I never saw him use a note. He either has an eidetic memory, which is just an ability to absorb the script, which, as you know, if you've been in the business for a while, you can, just through repeat. But his ability to move flexibly from subject to subject, I found, unlike his 2 sets of predecessors, Deng never used a script. But Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao did. So self-confidence. Secondly, as I would chat to him, when he was in Australia, I used to chat to him in Chinese when he was visiting. I'm a Chinese speaker for all my sins. There are many sins. He has a profound interest in his own history of China and the history of the Communist Party. He's steeped in his institutional and national history. And this partly disagrees with much of the analysis in China about the guy, which says that he's not sophisticated or well-educated and all the rest of it. Not in my experience. His ability to move subtly across questions of party history, national history, and some world history was quite impressive. And I think thirdly, I don't think I'm imposing this as a post facto memory, but you know when you meet folks in political life and national political life who you know have a defined sense of absolute mission, he's one of them. I'm reluctant to use the term man of history because we know what that refers to in the current international political environment, who's a man whose initials are V and P. But this guy sees himself as a man of history, pushing the country forward against a defined plan for the future. No sense of humour, despite my best efforts over multiple glasses of Australian red wine. All sorts of things which I found enormously amusing that I was saying, but didn't elicit a ha from the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party. So that's the guy that I've encountered.
Right. You said that he has a deep sense of history. One thing that I often encountered with some of my counterparts, people on the Russian side, was that it was a deep sense of history, but it was a warped sense of history, a distinctive sense of history. Brought up in the Chinese system, would you say that it is an accurate sense of history? How would you characterize his sense of history?
Twofold. Party history, which is its own beast in the Chinese system. They call it Dang Li Shi. It's like this received set of orthodoxies, like the evolution of the CPSU in the Soviet Union. A reasonably orthodox reflection with a capacity for some honesty about stuff that went wrong. On national history, obviously through the prism of party history, but still able to deal with challenges and criticism, like, you know, when I'd reflect on the excesses of the Cultural Revolution and the Great Leap Forward and that sort of stuff. Like, these are not happy episodes in the history of the Communist Party. And Xi Jinping, on the public record on China, says we don't discuss these things anymore because they give rise to what he describes as historical nihilism, which is so many problems in the party's history that it undermines belief in the party's mission. But you can challenge him on it, but no, his rendition is relatively orthodox. World history, because he doesn't read English and doesn't speak English, it will always be done through the prism of stuff written in the Chinese lens. But what he does read, and the other leadership read, is Chinese translations of the stuff you and I write in the international media. Probably you more than me, actually. So, and that I find interesting because that acts as I won't say a corrective, but at least there's an opportunity to get through because it's what we foreign barbarians think and write, and therefore can be observed as such. Open brackets. Of course, it's wrong. Close brackets, but at least it's there to be read.
Well, if he's a man of history, what does he want his legacy to be at the end of his life? Let's not confine it to his political life. What does he want history to say about him?
Well, his mother is 96. His father died when he was 89, and his father was a member of the Politburo, Xi Zhongxun. And I think Xi Jinping, having put the pork dumplings down, has decided that he probably can live quite a while. So when we talk about him being reappointed at this party congress for another 5 years, realistically, once you've purged as many people as Xi Jinping has purged in the last 10 years, you cannot leave office. You've got to stay there. Because otherwise they're going to come and get you. Authoritarian systems are like that. When I lost office in Australia, they didn't come after me and get me, though some of them wanted to. And so it's slightly different. So therefore, when you say when he leaves the scene, which in my view is when he dies, so I think, barring an act of God, this guy is going to be General Secretary or Chairman of the Communist Party, one formulation or other, at least until the late 2030s. He's now 69. By the time you finish the 23rd Party Congress at 2037, he'll be a tender age of 84, almost young enough to run for President of the United States. See, I can say that. I'm not a Republican.
That's a bipartisan comment.
Well taken. So what does he want his legacy to be, given that he's going to be around for quite a while? My judgment is as follows. 3 core things. 1, to preserve the party as a revolutionary party of control within China and resist any forces predisposed towards removing the party's power or reducing it. He's looked at the collapse of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. He's terrified by it and therefore will not compromise on it. So his view, as reflected in a conversation which he had with a friend of mine once, which was, he pointed to his veins and said, "Dang zai wo men de shui guai." The party is in our veins. So anyone who's got a view that there is a nice transition to a happier form of political pluralism, I think they need to get real. Number 2, I think he does want to China to have become at least a bigger economy than the United States and to be on the road to becoming the preeminent regional and global power over America. And I think when you look carefully at the texts, that's quite clear. It's not said in those explicit terms, but when you look at the official dogma, which is 中华民族伟大复兴, the great rejuvenation of the Chinese people, it means bringing it back to China's global position as it was before we foreign barbarians arrived in the first place, and that is as the preeminent power. And the last thing is Taiwan. He wants that under his belt. And that is part and parcel of the mission statement. Whether he secures it or not depends not just on him, but on all of us as well.
I want to come back to Taiwan in a moment, but if he wants to supersede the now dominant power, the United States, well, how does he view the United States? Is it that he can do this, China can do this, because the United States is a declining power? We always talk about a rising China. Does he see the United States as a declining United States, and therefore there's an opening? Or are there things that he has to do to make certain that the United States declines? How does he see us?
He's, on the question of how does China achieve that national goal, he sees the responsibility is lying in two baskets. What do? Which is continue to fuel the growth of the economy, but that's where he has a problem. Because if he continues to fuel the growth of the economy through a continuing vitality of the Chinese private sector, which is what's got China where it's got to so far, then by reimposing ideological controls over the Chinese private sector, which is what he's doing and has been doing for the last 5 years, you therefore collapse Chinese growth. Well, when I say collapse it, radically reduce it. Average 6 or 7% down to maybe 2 or 3%. So that's his basket of what he needs to do, and based on that, to continue to radically invest in the Chinese military and to radically invest in China's technological self-reliance across all the semiconductor categories down to 3 and 6 millimeters, nanometers, not millimeters. Now, on the United States, which is, it takes two to tango in great power relations. If you read the ideological literature, which these guys produce, not just in the more formal speeches, but the stuff that you dig for in the party's theoretical journals, those exciting things you read on a weekend when you should be reading a good novel, but nerds like you and me, that we read this other stuff. The consistency and the resonance of the language about the rise of the East and decline of the West, and about the world's growing multipolarity, and about the irresolvable problems in the American democracy, the systemic divisions which now prevent the Americans from acting on the global stage effectively. A house divided unto itself cannot stand, to paraphrase that great American president. The conclusion in their system is that structurally the United States and the West is in structural decline, and that an alternative development model, his form of what I call state capitalism, increasingly, however, a Marxist form of state capitalism, is the alternative model, development model, not just for China but for the world. So it's this cocktail of, I think, an irrational self-belief in the inherent success, his new development model, which is highly state-controlled, unlike under Jiang, Hu and Deng. And secondly, I think, an equally irrational view that this country is incapable of continued reinvention, either politically or economically, which the last 100 years demonstrates that you've been remarkably good at.
To use a good Marxist term, you've just described for him, though, a set of contradictions. Because he, in effect, wants to outpace the U.S. economy, and yet, do you think he understands that the move toward statism, toward the killing of the goose that laid the golden egg among the private companies, that the bringing down of sanctions, the decoupling, the fact that the United States, he gave that speech when he said, I'm going to surpass the United States in all of these frontier technologies, and that was a kind of Sputnik moment for the United States. Does he understand that there's a contradiction between the path that he's on and the desire to get to an economy that will outgrow that of the United States? Do you think does he get that? Does he listen to anyone about that? Because another way to learn this would be to listen, for instance, to a Li Ka-shing who might make that argument.
That's true. I'm glad you used the word contradictions, because I've just completed some research project on Xi Jinping's ideology, and it's enough to drive a man to drink. Because I've had to reread dialectical materialism, reread historical materialism, reread intersection of opposites, their resolution through contradiction and struggle. And
I once read the phenomenology of mind in order to understand this.
God.
It's a long time.
I'm sorry about that.
It takes a long time, yeah.
Have you recovered yet?
Not really.
Because I've got to say, wrapping your head around this entirely different systemology, and it's not just a conclusion about the future course of history, which is historical determinism. It's also a rolling epistemology for understanding what's happening now in this world of contradiction and struggle. So the irony is, yes, he sees himself and prides himself in being a numero uno dialectician. Yeah, not something you'd boast about at your local football club, but a first-class dialectician. The intersection of progressive and reactionary forces, contradiction, resolution through struggle, and you move on to inexorable advance to socialism and communism, probably by next Thursday night, at least here in Stanford. That's kind of the worldview. Yeah. But, notwithstanding that, you have this puzzling contradiction about his contradictions, which is the one you've just alluded to. Okay, so I'm Xi Jinping, I'm looking at Jack Ma, I'm looking at Tencent, I'm looking at this bright, brilliant, breezy, innovative, world-beating tech sector, tech platens, Pintai Jinji, out there. And rather than saying, woo, go China, he's seeing threat, threat, and threat. Right. Because A, they're controlling too much data, in his view. B, they're all billionaires. Increasingly problematic because they become alternative status figures within the country other than party leaders and political leaders. And C, if this private sector continues to grow, and it's now 61% of GDP, then wither the party, or the party withers. Now, so he's got all that in the back of his head. So he thinks he's being a great dialectician by saying, I'm going to head this off at the pass. Okay, I'm ahead of the contradiction. Right. Okay, I've spotted where struggle must occur, and I'm ahead of the curve in doing so. But his failure in doing that is he has no intrinsic understanding of what a financial market is, what a normal market in the economy is. This is not part of his ideological national security political training. So whereas he thinks he's actually acting dialectically to prevent the private sector from ultimately marginalising the party, he is killing the goose that laid the golden egg because he doesn't comprehend it. Does he have people who come in and say, Xi Dada, Uncle Xi, this is not wise? I think there are one or two who could say that, but the evidence to date is there's been, in this shift to the left on economic policy, which has now been underway for 5 years since the 19th Party Congress, in all the areas that you listed before and a few others, the evidence to date is there's been precious little course correction despite the slowing of growth. I think they may find, by the way, as a footnote to that answer, they may find a way after the Congress and before the next National People's Congress in March to begin to experiment with the current Hong Kong model of exiting zero COVID, but that's quite a separate matter to the other ideological shifts to the left between private sector and public sector, which I think have been much bigger forces in slowing the economy.